Hello, believers, non believers, and everyone in between. You're listening to Stories with Sapphire. I am Sapphire Sandalo. Now get cozy and open your mind because it's story time. Death is a Woman, submitted by Jackie. My grandfather came to visit us from Mexico in the summer. He was getting surgery to help him breathe better, and he was staying with my aunt until he recovered. He was stuck in a wheelchair and too weak to walk, but he still had a very positive attitude most of the time. I loved my grandpa. We would bond over his scary experiences with brujas in Mexico. He didn't visit often, so I really savored the time we had while he was recovering. He also really enjoyed staying at my aunt's house because of all the animals she had. They reminded him of his ranch. My aunt had 3 dogs, 2 cats, even a sweet little green bird. Its name was Kiko. It was very pretty, especially its blue cheeks, and very loud. My aunt placed Kiko's cage on a shelf next to the window. Every time I came through the door, Kiko would be squawking up a storm. And when I would talk with my grandpa, it would sometimes interrupt him mid-sentence. Whenever it did, we would just turn towards each other and laugh. One day, my grandfather was awoken all of a sudden. He was paralyzed. There was a figure standing by the window. He described it as a skeletal figure, but he made it out as a woman. Her hair was in patches, and you could see her dry, almost burnt-looking scalp. Her shoulder bones peeking from under the skin. She looked like she was about to fall over. My grandfather was sitting down, shocked. What was he supposed to do? He was too scared to move. Even if he wanted to, he couldn't call anyone because he was home alone. Minutes passed, and all he could do was stare at her, hoping he would wake up or she would just disappear. After what seemed like an hour, he tried to speak. What do you want? The second his words left his mouth, the figure quickly turned to him. Her face was so sunken in. She looked dead. Her jaw was wide open, too open to be normal or human. She had no lips. Her teeth were sticking out. She had no brows, and her eyes were the worst part. They had nearly no color. They were just 2 dark pupils. My grandfather was silent. He looked at the figure for another hour. Then, the figure slowly walked up to the shelf where the bird was, its smile widening with an already wide jaw. Her hands touched the bird cage, and then she turned to look at my grandfather and slowly started to walk to him. My grandfather's heart was pounding while the skeletal figure crept closer and closer to him. With every step, he could see more and more of her wrinkles with her sunken-in face, and those dark pupil eyes widened. He was frozen and couldn't move. Right when the figure was 2 inches from his face, her hand reached out for him. All of a sudden, my grandfather gained a burst of courage and started to shout at the figure as loud as he could, cursing at it, calling for help, and cursing at it again. The figure only 2 inches from his face. The figure started to growl at my grandfather, but that didn't stop my grandpa from cursing at it. Eventually, the figure stopped reaching for him, stood up straight, and walked away. She walked behind him, out of my grandpa's line of vision where he couldn't turn to see her. Was she gone? He couldn't tell. Then he blacked out. He was then awoken by my cousin coming in through the door. He was filled with relief, knowing that it was all a dream. My cousin walked over to my grandpa, gave him a hug, and he hugged her back, happy to see her. Then they both realized something felt wrong. The house was quiet, unusually quiet. Kiko was no longer chirping. My cousin went over to the cage. "What's wrong, sweetie? What do you see?" my grandpa asked. "Kiko died. It's on its back. There's foam coming out of its mouth. Poor thing," my cousin replied. My grandfather was filled with sadness and then goosebumps when he remembered that the figure touched the cage. He realized that wasn't just an ordinary woman or some sort of ghost, but death itself. And it was right in front of him. This take might be upsetting, but I think this is what happened. This figure came with the intent of taking Grandpa's life. She probably sensed how weak he was. But then Grandpa showed her he was still strong enough to fight for his life. And because she had already taken Kiko, she saw that as an acceptable sacrifice and let Grandpa be for now. If it weren't for Kiko, I don't think Grandpa would have woken up. Thanks for joining me today. What are the ways death has appeared to you? Send me an email at storieswithsapphire@gmail.com. And did you know that I offer bone and tarot readings? You can schedule a session at StoriesWithSapphire.com. Salamat and good night.